Welcome to The Growth Project, a podcast brought to you by AMPLOS. Dr. Drew Brannon, joined today by Dr. Cory Shaffer, fresh off of a little bit of a Christmas and New Year's holiday break. Welcome back, sir.
Yes, good to be back. For our listeners who are wondering, we will take some time here at some point, I think, to break down and to sort of close the book on the 2024-2025 college football season. So if that's what you were expecting out of this first episode or so of the new year, hold tight. We'll get there. I'm not sure if that's us licking wounds or just needing a little bit more time, but we'll get there. That's not the topic of today, though.
I was hoping that conversation was going to be happening at the end of January.
For sure. Yes. I think we both were.
However, we're eligible for it currently.
We are. I was eligible for it about 5 o'clock Eastern. That game kicked off about 5:30 Eastern. I was eligible for that conversation, unfortunately.
So yes, we will get to that, and we will not just be lamenting the fact that it ended like it did, because there was a lot of positives.
For sure.
A lot of positives. But Today is not about that. Today is focused on, and Cory, as we kind of get into this conversation, I want to kick it off in this way. I know that you and I are like this, and we're not the only ones. Many people, I think, tend to feel this way. But as you close up a year, which we've officially done that, we're on the other side of 24 now into 25. But as you get to the end of the year and you're closing some things up, I think one of the natural things people do is they begin to take stock in what has now in the rearview mirror, like how things went. And as you think about how things went, the natural thing to do is then look down the tunnel into the year ahead and try to make some plans, try to think about like doing some things differently. Mm-hmm. So I think on a really, really high level, that's a normal human experience to review and then project. I'd imagine that's something you've already kind of worked through this year, correct?
Yeah. And we've done episodes similar to this in years past. We've always talked about, like you mentioned, this time of year, post or holidays, post Christmas, New Year's, whatever, a really good time to reflect, but most people don't do that well. So How can we formalize that a little bit, maybe bring a better framework to it to get more out of it? We've definitely talked in the past about, how to set goals properly and that type of thing. As well. But again, today is going to be a little bit more in the vein of that and related to resolutions and that type of thing. But yes, this is a practice that I try to engage in regularly. It always begins with, hey, let's take stock of and close out the previous year before we start looking ahead, as you just mentioned, and what's coming down the tunnel. What do I want to do? I think just psychologically, because to be clear, behavior change can happen anytime.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the psychology of this is interesting, and just what the new year represents.
Yeah.
Is I think a natural time frame for people to start thinking in these terms, when maybe any other time of year they aren't thinking in these terms. This feels like the time when okay, I'm supposed to now.
Yeah. Right.
And I think, even if I think about what I've done here recently, and some of it is engaging in the same practices that I've done forever, if I'm intentional and thorough throughout the year with how I am kind of tracking my goal progress and breaking things down just in life on a month-to-month basis, then by the time I get to the end of the year, that's a whole lot easier. It's just sort of a summary of that collection of 12, monthly recaps. Mm-hmm. But even I think this time around, it's interesting. I've used the same planner for probably the last 5 years or so.
Nice.
And I felt like it really worked for me, but I also felt like, and there's always a balance in this kind of stuff. Hey, maybe it's time for something new.
Yeah.
Just visually something a little bit different. So maybe I break some bad habits that have probably, kind of crept into using this planner and how I use it. And just a different format, a different structure. And it doesn't mean that there's a ton of behavior change associated with it, but there was this inherent, I'm kind of looking to do something just a little bit different, a little bit of a new perspective. So, to intro this how you did is spot on, right? Even I think for you and I who do this and we're in this every day, but there was still that inherent sense of I just want to switch it up.
Yeah, do something different, which is healthy.
Yeah.
So as we get into this, like the most common way people do some form of what we're talking about is in and this is almost a little bit of kind of a tongue-in-cheek term at this point, but the New Year's resolution, right? And so we've all heard that term. We're all familiar with this idea of creating New Year's resolutions. But just for the sake of complete clarity, Cory, when we say that people are setting some New Year's resolutions, like what does that mean?
Yeah, so I always just love like, hey, let's start with a definition. So if you look up the definition of a resolution, it is a firm decision to do or not to do something.
That's kind of ironic.
Exactly, right? That's why I wanted to start there, because it's just funny to frame it in that way. And I always like to contrast stuff like this. You know, we've had this conversation about like goals and expectations. Well, what's the difference between a goal and a resolution, right? So resolution, a firm decision. A goal is the object of a person's ambition or effort. And I've always loved that definition just because what it captures is like, yes, there is something we're setting out to do, but like the focus, the emphasis of the definition is, what are you putting into it?
Yeah, right.
The ambition and the effort, right? Like what's the process to get there? Okay. You want it.
Yeah.
That thing out in the distance. And so resolution to me, again, it sort of misses that, this intent to change.
Yeah. That's what I think the key, to me, the operative word is always like it's an intention to change.
For sure. It's a decision, right? But a decision without action is still just intention.
Correct. Yeah.
And that is where I think just inherently the idea of, you know, resolutions, and at this point, man, it's so well documented that people suck at them. And we'll talk about why and some of the stats and all that. But
and to me, that's the great irony, right? Is like what was the definition again? You said a firm
decision.
Yeah. So the data would indicate it's not so firm.
It's not at all firm. Literally, it's the opposite of firm.
But I think category-wise, I think it's also helpful to think in terms of categories. And so this idea of New Year's resolutions, we tend to put these in the categories of start, stop, adjust. You're going to start doing something, you're going to stop doing something, or you're going to adjust something that's currently taking place or taking shape in your life, meaning dialing up or dialing down. Those are kind of some safe categories that we can utilize of what this really means. And it's really just about varying types of behavior change. But that's big picture what New Year's resolutions are. You know, you might be kind of wondering, or listeners that is like, well, how widely does this happen? So what are some of the numbers that we're aware of when you look at, and I want to caveat all the data we're going to go through. There are lots of different examples of organizations, entities, universities, whatever, looking into these things. The research that we are going to talk about is really a compilation of Pew Research, which is certainly an authoritative guide on this, a study from Columbia University, and then some U.S. Census Bureau data as well. So those are the three sources. We're not going to say what's what throughout, but those are the three sources that we really are relying on.
Yeah, so in terms of how widely does this occur, at least in the United States, some of the statistics here, 3 in 10 Americans are made New Year's resolution in 2024.
Okay, so about 30%.
30% of the U.S. population.
It's a lot.
I don't know. When I read that initially, I was just kind of like, wow, I expected it to be more than that. And I'm not sure why I had that but that was the initial reaction when I saw the number, was just like, that doesn't seem like a lot. Now, we're still talking millions of people, right, to be clear. But the breakdown I thought was, sort of interesting. 49% of that number is in the age bracket of 18 to 29. 31% in the 30 to 49 age bracket, and then only 21% of 50 plus. Any reaction to that?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting stuff. And I'm going to kind of connect it to something we've talked a lot about on the Growth Project for many years, which is growth mindset. And so, of course, one of the primary tenets of growth mindset is continual pursuit of better. Right? We've used that language of maintaining dreams that are greater than your memories and all of that. But it's I think in a real succinct way, it's like leaning in toward improvement and development. And it's not lost on me that the older we get, the less people are really trying to formulate some change in their life. Now, that doesn't mean that the only way to formulate change is to report that you created a New Year's resolution. But the numbers are decreasing as we age. And that's right on par with one of the cautionary tales we have out there about the importance of not becoming stagnant.
I think it's interesting when you combine some of those statistics with, this next statistic that 62% of those people that are doing this felt pressure to do so.
Yeah.
So the first question you ask is like, okay, well, why is that? Where is that pressure coming from? Mm-hmm. And at least my initial answer for that is this is probably a very popular like corporate practice. Yeah. This is happening in a lot of organizations, within a lot of teams, different industries, and so on. And then if it starts to make sense if your younger population is doing the most of it because they're the ones who are
most eager.
Well, they're frontline employees, right? Like they're sort of at the bottom of the totem pole, and whoever's above is the one saying like, "Hey, we need to do this.
You should do this, right?
You should do this.
Yeah.
I don't need this, but you need this.
It'd be great for you.
You're young and hungry. You need to grow and develop." So that was kind of my initial reaction. Again, that's just a hunch, I suppose, some intuition there.
Yeah.
You have any thoughts on that?
Well, but I think the stat you just reeled off there is extremely important and explanatory in terms of like why people aren't very good at this. Mm-hmm. Because when you tell me that, hey, 62%, so basically the way this worked is of the people who indicated, yes, I participated in a New Year's resolution process, the next question was, well, why'd you do that? And so of that population, 62% are saying, I did it because I felt pressure to do it. Well, it's quickly pretty obvious why so many people are unsuccessful in this realm, because that just takes us directly into intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation and reasons and motives, where we know this through many, many studies, and then just even kind of intuitive psychology as well, is if you're doing something because you feel pressure to do it, that's an extrinsic purpose. Mm-hmm. It's not an intrinsic
motive. And that's why,
motive.
again, I think my hunch and why it makes sense with the dwindling numbers as through age, or as it's correlated to age, was a little bit of like, when you're younger, you're being told to do it. If you're still 50 plus and you're doing it, it's because you want to do it.
Yeah, for sure. Much more balls in your court. You're making that decision.
Again, that's just a guess. That's a hunch. But
does that mean that when you're 50, you're only going to do what you want to do? Is that what?
Potentially, I don't know. Let's get Milt on here and ask him.
Oh, that'll be me before I know it. But yes, I think that's a very important piece of this puzzle here. And it's the whole intrinsic versus extrinsic thing. Something I would just kind of put on our listeners right now is think about the things in your life that you have been the most devoted to at any given point. And I can almost assure you that whatever that thing is, you chose it. Mm-hmm. Like you didn't do it because someone said you should or pressured you to, like it was your thing and you had great ownership over it, whatever it might be, whether it was like, hey, I want to, hike to this summit of whatever, or like, man, it's so important to me, I want to take my family to Disney World one day, or I want, like, whatever it is, like you did it and you followed through with it because it mattered.
I mean, it's not any different from, I feel like there are countless stories or examples that you hear about, like, let's say the person goes to the doctor for years and gets the same report every time, just like, hey, health is deteriorating, like you need to lose weight and start exercising more and eat healthier and stop drinking or smoking or whatever. And there's no change and no change and no change and no change. And then eventually something happens, usually something significant. And all of a sudden there's behavior change. That could be a heart attack. That could be like, hey, now I have, grandchildren and I want to see them grow and this and that. But what ultimately has shifted there is just the person finally shifting from an extrinsic thing, like somebody else is telling me to do this, to now I want to do it. And that's why there's such a shift. So,
okay, so that what you just opened up there too a little bit, Cory, is a good segue into when people decide that, okay, hey, I'm making a New Year's resolution and it is going to be focused on this. Let's go through some of the categories and as far as where people place their focus. So what's the most popular, here we go, New Year's resolution trivia. What's the number one answer on the board? Most popular category.
Yeah, Family Feud. So if you get that question ever on Family Feud, here's your answer. Anything related to health, exercise, diet, that's going to be number one. And
at what rate?
79%. And to be clear, and maybe Drew, make sense of these numbers we're going to give. They're not going to add up to 100%. Can you explain why that is?
No. So in the data that we were looking at, in the population of people who make New Year's resolutions, the question is, what percentage of them had a resolution in this category?
So you can hit multiple categories,
Correct.
which is why the number does not equal 100%.
So 79% of people that chose a New Year's resolution had one that was related to health, exercise, and diet.
Right.
Next on the list was money or finances. So 61% of people that chose a resolution had something pertaining to focusing or making changes on how they spend their money or save their money or whatever it might be.
Yep. Next on the list here, number 3, 57% related to relationships with family or friends.
So wanting to do something different, see a change, see something develop there. 55% was the next one for hobbies or personal interests. So that could be a matter of like, hey, I love playing golf. I played one time in 2024, and this year I'm going to get out there more with my buddies and play more golf. Mm-hmm. And hopefully you've done it in a more specific way than that. But that's a good example of how people would make a resolution.
Yep. And then last on the list here, 49% had a resolution related to their work or their career. So something related to their professional life.
Yeah.
Maybe that could be like, hey, I want to get this certification. I want to put myself in a position to get a promotion, and that means doing A, B, or C, something like that.
Yeah. So that's what people focus on. We've talked about the fact that, we see a great variability across different demographics of age of who actually participates in this versus those that do not. Cory, let's also talk about, and this is the part that, we're all familiar with this. We know that these tend to not hang on real long. So what does the research say about how successful people tend to be with New Year's resolutions?
No, it's not good. It's not good. Let's start there. Rip off the Band-Aid. Again, this Columbia University study estimated that only about 25% of people are still committed to their resolution beyond the first 30 days of the year. So basically,
Ouch.
by the time that calendar flips to February, we've lost 75% of the group and their resolutions.
Let's just pause for a second and think about that. Now, this is a fascinating study in human behavior and human psychology, because when people make these decisions, whether they are end of December or early part of January, we have no doubt that they mean it. Like, it's not a matter of like, did they really want to do this? Now, this is real important. Motivation or desire or passion, whatever we're talking about, is not a binary construct. And I don't know a better example than the New Year's resolutions. It is not a either you are or you aren't type deal here. It's not, hey, either you care or you don't, either you're motivated or you're not. It's not how this works. This is all continuum-based constructs. So what this tells us, I think, is like, hey, we don't have many people who are very far up the continuum when it comes to how important this is to them. Mm-hmm. And I know we'll get into some plan-related stuff, but how does that number hit you of like the fact that 75% of people are out in 30 days or less?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it probably hits us a little bit differently since we're so familiar and, spend a lot of time in this space.
True.
Right? Like we do this a lot, and people always seem to struggle with, setting goals and that type of thing. So it's not that surprising, honestly. I don't know, I guess to go in the next number here, and this will help, I guess, kind of make my point, but we go from 25% still committed beyond 30 days to only 9%, or varying numbers here.
Yeah, varying.
Okay.
The high end is 9.
The high end is 9. The low end is about 1%.
That make it what?
That make it the full 12 months.
Right.
Okay. It's a little bit surprising, I guess, that if you make it through the first 30 days, that you don't make it, I guess 12 months, I understand that's a really long time, but it almost feels like, man, the biggest uphill battle is the first 30 days, mm-hmm. right? Like at that point, you would think maybe you've made some progress, some traction. Like now that motivation starts to shift a little bit more intrinsic, because now you see that like, hey, I'm getting better. I'm making progress. Things are moving in the direction that I want them to.
Yep.
So I guess I was surprised by the number going from 25 almost down to potentially what's like 1%. Like that to me was the bigger number of being like, oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are whatever single digit you want to go with. Like bottom line is it's single digits percentage wise of those that make it throughout the remainder of the year. But let's go back for just a second, because I think this is important to hit on the 30-day fallout. And let's talk for a minute, Cory, about what's expected or what a person should expect in those first 30 days. And I always like to use the example of, so this is truly like you pushing the rock up the hill. Mm-hmm. It is difficult. It is new. It is challenging. It is pushing you outside of comfort zones. It is demanding a lot of you. And, I think one of the common things that happens in those first 30 days is as people are pushing this rock up the hill, what they then do is kind of extrapolate that out over the remaining months and think like, oh man, if this is this hard already, I don't see any way I can keep this up over the next 11 months. Sure. And so what mistake are they making?
I think from the start, it's probably representative of a couple of things. There's probably a lack of awareness as to where the true starting point is. Two, there is maybe a unrealistic expectation of, I think more to your point, kind of how quickly progress will come or something along those lines. I think there's probably a disillusion around how challenge or like just what can get in the way, right? Like a lack of awareness and understanding of kind of the obstacles, probably some lack of education or knowledge about the thing they're attempting to do. And overall, I mean, I've even fallen into the trap of kind of, again, I wouldn't, in my mind, never say I'm setting resolutions, but goals.
Yeah.
Almost just being so in the moment of this sounds really good to write down, sort of being swept up in just the experience of like, I'm setting a resolution and having maybe biting off more than you can chew. So like a combination of all of those things, I think, is why you see the numbers play out like they do.
And to add to that, people don't realize that it actually does get easier.
Yeah. And that's what I mean. Just like there's not an education and understanding around like if it's exercise, for example, like, man, the first 30 days is going to be the most difficult.
Yeah, the hardest part.
And after that, you've kind of gotten over that biggest hump.
Right.
And will you still hit plateaus? Will it still be hard? For sure. But like, yeah, at that point, the hardest work is out of the way.
Yeah. And so I think if it actually stayed equally difficult to what it is in the first 30 days, you might have even less people still standing at the end.
Yeah.
Which is hard to do because there's very few people standing at the end. But it gets easier. And that's really kind of where it can be particularly unfortunate is the people who are able to maybe stick with it for those 30 days and maybe even slightly beyond. It's like, well, you did the hard stuff.
Right.
Don't bail out now.
Yeah. So, what this research is showing is that the most popular way that helps that small sliver of single percentage people actually stick with it and see it through is with the use of a planner or a journal, something that we've talked about at various points pretty extensively here on the Growth Project. But again, this just comes down to the constant sort of awareness around where you stand, the progress you've made, how far there is to go. It just helps you know where you're at, chunk things up, I think, into smaller pieces, which is a really, really helpful thing in this type of endeavor. So we wanted to make sure that we mentioned that in terms of like, hey, one thing to do, and we'll come around to this at the end. But
And I think the other thing that highlights, Cory, is the importance of visibility. You think about what do people often get frustrated a bunch about these days is how much people are on their phone. And it's like, well, why are you on your phone so much? Because it's sitting right there. All I have to do is pick it up. Right. So you can also use that to your advantage of if you want to stick with whatever your resolution is and you're utilizing a journal, if it's sitting right there, there's a greater likelihood you're going to be thinking about it and stay mindful of it, like you said, and do something with it.
Yeah, if you have to write about it or document it on a daily basis, you're much more likely to do it. Or you at least have to have the conversation with yourself at some point around, maybe I don't really want to do this.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
Right.
At least then maybe like stop pretending, stop lying to yourself, shift your focus, your attention, your energy, your resources to something you do want to do.
Yep, 100%. All right, so we've already kind of hit on this a little bit, but let's be sure we clearly spell out, like, why are people having such a hard time? Why are they failing when it comes to New Year's resolution? And so part of it is certainly the intrinsic versus extrinsic that we talked about. But what are some other factors that really are getting in the way, do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to go off script here for a second. And this is one that I wanted to add, and I already alluded to it, which is why I want to just bring it back. But I think people do a poor job of anticipating challenges and then overcoming obstacles when they do get in the way. Because when we plan these things out, especially if you're not really educated on how to do it properly, what you get fixated on is the outcome you intend to achieve. There's, of course, I think some idea around like, okay, if I want to lose weight, I need to eat healthier. I need to maybe exercise more. But it's pretty much just that.
Yeah.
What they don't anticipate is really thinking about like, well, what could get in the way of me actually engaging in those behaviors?
Yeah.
So then when those things pop up, as they inevitably do and will, it's like there's no plan. Right?
Yep.
There's nothing to kind of fall back on. And it just becomes so easy at that point to just take the easy path, the easy route, whatever that may be.
Yep.
I think one that I've talked about, I think on the podcast in the past is, one of the challenges I've had and had to adapt to over the years, the more that I've traveled, and you know this, like, man, traveling will strain your habits and your routines in a very, very real way.
Yes,
right?
it will.
And I think early on, that was just something I wasn't prepared to adapt to, like didn't understand like what it was like to try to eat a meal in an airport. You know what I mean? And
but wait, there's a McDonald's and Burger King right there.
Well, exactly. That's the point, right? Like airports don't tend to have the best, most healthiest options. And when they do, it's coming in a bag that's been sitting there for days. Like it's just not great, right? And I found it hard at times to, hey, when am I supposed to exercise? Like, how do I prioritize that? Like, that means I have to pack extra clothes. That means it just like is a whole host of things that if you're not thinking about it, you're not prepared for it. So in the moment, what do? You do what's easy. Mm-hmm. You go to McDonald's, you don't work out. Right. So if you just gone on a 3-day trip, there's 3 days that you did not do anything related to your resolution. If anything, you've gone in the opposite direction.
Which is building a habit.
For sure. So that was one that I wanted to take note of, right? We tend to just think so linearly of here's where I am and here's where I'm going to be. Like, and I'm just going to do the thing and I'll get to where I want to go. Like, man, I would love that for us all. It just doesn't work that way.
Yep. Yeah, very true. So I think it's an improper understanding of how to put the pieces together, like you're describing. And then I think even, for those that make an attempt to do that, oftentimes the plans, and this is true in goal setting as well, it just lacks specificity. It lacks appropriate behaviors, doesn't have a feasible on-ramp to the behavior. Like we're trying to run before we crawl. Like there's no sequencing involved in it. We just kind of jump straight into it. And you wouldn't do that anything else in your life, right? Like if you were trying to learn how to play the piano, you wouldn't start with like Beethoven. Mm-hmm. You would start with something. I don't know. I don't play the piano. Something other than Beethoven. But there's just not enough planning that goes into how do I actually pull this off?
Yeah. And then the one other thing I think is worth noting here, and again, true for goal setting endeavors, but just setting too many resolutions. Yeah. And that's why, again, go back to what we talked about a few minutes ago, why those numbers don't add up to 100%. Is because people are setting multiple resolutions.
Yes.
I would actually argue that if those numbers did add up to 100% and people were just setting one, the likelihood that they stick with it goes up probably pretty dramatically.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get into that because we don't want this just to be the like negative podcast on New Year's resolutions. Let's provide a little hope here near the end of our conversation. How can you do this well? Because you can. You can be in that small segment of folks who get a lot out of this. So let's talk about how. And I think the place to begin is exactly what you just said. You got to start small. You got to start, instead of getting out of your previous year and feeling these strong leanings toward, I'm going to do this and this and this and this. Let's realize that you don't have to choose all the things you want to do in a year in January. Let's just start with something that seems important and make progress.
Yeah, and again, this is relative, and I'll give an example of what I mean by that. And this is why I mentioned, I think, there has to be a clear understanding of where you are, because starting small to somebody, let's just say, number one here, let's say exercise, right? That's the most common. If somebody who hasn't exercised in their life or in years, right, like it's unrealistic to say, like, I'm going to run a marathon. maybe like, I mean, way down the line,
yeah.
That's possible. But right now, it should not at all be your focus.
Yeah.
It's like, you just got to start exercising,
Yep.
period. Okay. Now, let's just say you have somebody who exercises regularly. Let's say a runner. You're a runner, right? And so, yeah, I've been running pretty consistently. I run, 20 miles a week. But this year, I want to run a marathon, my first ever marathon, something along those lines. Well, that person has a different starting point.
Very
but
different.
Even still, for that person, it's not going to do them any good to say, hey, I'm running 20 miles a week now, but I'm just going to start running 20 miles a day, right? Like, that doesn't make sense either.
That definitely doesn't make sense.
Right? Like, you still have to progressively work toward the thing, whatever it is. And so I just want to be sure that the having clarity on the start point is really important there, because that's what's going to determine what small really means for you.
Now, let me interject this too, because I think this is an excellent point you're making. Here's what can really get in the way with creating that starting line is emotion. Because what's normal and common is I'm wrapping up my year and I'm kind of looking back and I feel emotional about something of like, gosh, I did it again. I said I wasn't going to do it and I did it anyways. Or I said I was going to do X and instead I did Y. Like, there's emotion involved in this. And so when you have that internal emotion about something in your life you want to be different, you don't get that excited about starting small. Like, that's not what people want to do. If I feel emotional about something, I want to start big. I want to create a big goal, a big intention. And you've got to go counter to what you feel in that moment. You've got to understand that, okay, I'm not going to choose what's exciting. I'm going to choose what's smart, because that's how you build momentum.
Yeah. I think along with that then is about creating a plan with that has some clarity. I think you've determined at this point what it is that you want to do. Now you need to start narrowing in on what are these specific actions or behaviors, or like Andrew Huberman would use the phrase, like, you got to find the verbs that are going to help you accomplish the goal, right? Or the resolution, whatever it is. And so if that's exercise or running, well, number one, run. Right? Now, the specificity or the clear plan is, how many days a week am I going to run, and for how long, or, what's my distance?
How hard,
right. Yeah, that kind of thing. Okay. But it's starting there, and that seems simple, but like, there's truth to that, right? Like, if you want to become a reader, and if you want to read, 12 books this year, that's a really common thing. Like, I'm going to read one a month. Okay.
Yep.
Well, you have to look. The number one key behavior is read. Believe it or not. But now it's like, okay, how am I going to bring that to life? When am I going to do it? How long am I going to do it? Am I going to protect it on my calendar? Like, what time of day? Whatever it is, it's just, you're starting to bring an actual plan and a blueprint to life, as opposed to just an intention.
Yep. And this cannot be ignored, because the specificity is just so key here, right? And so who knows how many people in America have created New Year's resolutions for 2025 that go something like this: I'm going to get healthier in 2025. The most common person who's choosing that has already gotten very good at being unhealthy. So if your intention is, I'm going to get healthier, that is so far away from what you really need to get healthier. And so I think, the specificity is everything. The concreteness of it, I mean, that's everything in terms of getting this better, or getting better in these areas. And then the other thing I would just put in here is understand that probably your best method is this idea of setting a target, hitting a target, resetting to a new target, and then pursuing the next one. But it's the cyclical process that you need to run here, not this real kind of fixed, finite thing of like, I'm going to do this one thing. Because because the problem with that is, like, you either aim too high with that, or you aim too low in an effort to just be sure you hit something, and there's no next chapter. So you got to be cyclical.
And within that cycle, if there's any intentional thought or reflection into, okay, I hit the first target, awesome. How did I do that?
Yeah, great. Very
like,
true.
Kind of what helped me get there, because those are things I obviously want to continue to do into this next little chunk of time.
Yeah.
If I struggle to hit the target, maybe even came up just short, it doesn't mean that the whole thing, you just, scratch it. But you should be asking yourself, well, what got in the way? Was the target too lofty, or did I not stick to that blueprint, the plan that I laid out for myself, or things just got in the way? Maybe the plan wasn't as good as I initially thought it was. All of those things, if you can break it down in a pretty objective way, it just helps you stay on track, I think, or get back on track or whatever.
All right. So I know we need to kind of move toward a close here. And I do want to end this. We're going to end a little positive. So we gave him some ideas. And I just want to say this too, as we kind of wrap up, that what I really do like and appreciate about the whole New Year's resolution discussion is I think it's awesome how it syncs up to what we believe to be true about people. And that is we're at our best when we're pursuing something. And I love the commonality of the human experience of there's something inside of us intrinsically that like we don't want to stay the same. Mm-hmm. Now, we don't always have the best understanding of how we should go about that. But I love the idea of like all these people across the world putting some thoughtfulness toward getting better and changing. Like I love that.
Yeah, I guess my final piece, and again, we've probably mentioned this on the podcast previously, and James Clear does a good job of explaining this in Atomic Habits, but what is also going to help this process at the outset is trying to set a resolution that's aligned to sort of who you want to be or become, right? Like it needs to be a part of your identity and not just this like means to an end that you're trying to achieve. And unfortunately, again, that's the intrinsic, extrinsic. It kind of goes back to that conversation. But if you say, well, I want to start exercising more because I think I really need to just value, my physical well-being. Like I just need to start taking care of myself. Like I have kids, I have grandkids. I want to see them grow and so on. And so I don't want to just do this for this year.
Yeah.
I want to adopt this as a part of like just who I am and my lifestyle. Right? That's going to help me live a longer, healthier life. Like that's going to stick much, much more so than, hey, I want to do this thing because,
great point.
It sounds good, or I saw it on social media, or whatever. So I think starting there, and again, that's why coming out of some reflection and hopefully some thought into, bigger picture, just who are you trying to become as a person, I think is a good place to begin.
Yep. All right. So, hey, it's early January. You got plenty of time to hopefully, if you're listening to this, integrate this into what you're working on and kind of aiming for in the year ahead. We're excited about it. Grateful to our listeners for your support of both AMPLOS and the Growth Project. And we are looking forward to bringing some great episodes and content to you throughout the course of the year. So with that in mind, look forward to our next conversation. Thank you for tuning in.